that's about it. So then we would move from just looking at their hands to control tool use, which is using a hand on an object onto another object to accomplish a task. So that's going to be our pencil and our scissor kind of thing. So coloring and tracing, we wound up realizing those are our pencil skills. Those are what movements are we using to move that pencil and control that pencil. So these require both motor control and coordination with the eyes. The items we came up with were, so you see coloring is 2 and tracing is at the bottom, and then cutting is the next section. So we're looking at the movements that they use for coloring, because the idea is it that they're not coloring because they have poorly controlled movements, or is there another reason for their coloring problem? So we looked at just how they look in terms of their shoulders, elbow, and wrists, how they vary them, and let's see, their accuracy scores are there, and that's minimal to what we want to really look at. We really want to look at what movements are they using to control that crayon, how they're holding it, how they're controlling it, whether they're coloring or tracing. And coloring is a little bit easier than tracing for most kids. You're in a whole area. But what movements are they using? Are they using their whole arm? Are they using their wrist and then turning the paper? That kind of thing. Are they using flexion and extension of the fingers, which most kids do? A lot of kids will do, and then they turn the paper and just keep doing that. Then they get tired and then they use their wrist or their whole arm, right? So what are they doing? Is it there a fatigue factor? Is there a pressure factor? Is there a control factor? And when we get to rotary, that's money. That's what we're going to use when we're writing all of those curved shapes. Do they use rotary movements when they're coloring? Can they use rotary movements when they're tracing? So I'm looking at flexion and extension. Wrist is usually doing the horizontal movements, and then rotary is going to be coloring in a more circular shape. So I want to look at what movements are they using, what is available, can I model it and they use it, is it within their zone of development or not? So that's kind of what we're trying to look at here, is what movements are they using to grasp and move the utensil. So the grasp is down there in terms of, in the tripod we put in 4, okay, mid-supination. Again, a lot of the kids who aren't really using supination, they're pronation. Do we want to work on that? Would that be part of our monitoring progress? And then tracing, as I went over it for this presentation, I realized we need to differentiate that a little bit better. Because I left it what I ended at the end of the school year. I didn't want to change it on everyone without their kind of consent. So I think that the tracing criteria might change and become a little bit more discriminating. And I'll show you why. Okay, the difference between, and I think this speaks to the VMI and the motor coordination subtest, that when we're looking at tracing, oh wait, the other thing before I move to that, is we're looking at the sensory feedback of vision and proprioception. And I think one of the things I put in parentheses that I talk about, but I cannot find a real reference for it, is I find the kids who can't decelerate. They cannot decelerate their movements. It's just they keep going. And those are the kids who bleed down the lines. They go off the side of the paper. They don't anticipate enough to decelerate their movements to control their movements. So that has become one of the things that I talk about with the kids and try to really focus on and work on. Even though there's no criteria anywhere that I can find about deceleration, I think it's something, I see enough nodding heads that people see that. And I do talk about that, in my reports, that they really have a hard time stopping their movements, whether they're coloring or tracing or writing. All right. This is the VMI. That the tasks of tracing have guidelines. They're very concrete, right? So you're really getting, I think, a good sense of the child's pencil control, given visual guidelines. You're not asking them to draw in free space. You're giving them guidelines. So we can have kids who do very well with that because it's a more concrete task, yet you take away the guidelines and we may see different kinds of control or other issues. So I look at that motor coordination as a really good indicator of how they can control their pencil. People agree with that? Yeah, I got it with one nod. And I've had kids who can do beautifully on that. They still can't write. So why can't they write? They still can't do some other things. Why can't they? That's the probe. But they do have good pencil control, given good guidelines. And then also, are their sensory motor skills influencing those coloring and tracing and cutting kinds of things? Then that's what why I want to work on it, because that's my, I think, contribution to the team.